Hello, and welcome to Research the News. This week, as always, we have a fake sponsor since we're not large enough to have real sponsors yet. And this week, we are brought to you by the Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan. He's the host of the show. If you've never heard the podcast before, it's really good. It goes through the history of some of the big historical revolutions, the American Revolution, French Revolution. The last season is this season, and he's going through a 2-part series on the Russian Revolution. But also, he goes through some of the historical revolutions that are not as well known. The Haitian Revolution is one that I highly recommend. One of the great things about it is that I know that personally, when I look at his Twitter feed, Mike Duncan and I probably have very opposite political views. But those political views don't make it into the show. It's all about the historical side of it, which I really appreciate. So check it out. He's also the host of The History of Rome, if you listen to that. But revolutionspodcast.com. And this week, we're back with Research the News. All right, we're bringing Gretchen on. Gretchen, welcome again.
Ray. How's it
to
going?
Research the News. It is good. Things are well. I'm trying to be more, now that I'm a podcast mogul, I am trying to get better with my grammar. And we are both trying to get better with not saying which word, Gretchen?
Like.
So if you hear us say like on the show, feel
Keep a
free
running
to
tally.
text
We want to
me.
know.
Yeah, we want to know. There was too many likes. We apologize for all of those in the previous. And I don't even want to say the word anymore. It's the L word. I think that's what we're going to say from now on. But last week we actually talked about bad decisions and the repercussions from them. And we started something new on the Facebook page for Research the News, facebook.com/Research the News. We're doing little clips. One of the things I really appreciated last week was hearing Gretchen's explanation about why when one woman comes forward, then it seems like a bunch tend to come afterwards when there's harassment allegations. And so I always was a little bit confused about that as to the reasoning behind it. And I think you summed it up really well. So thank you for that, Gretchen.
Thank you.
And check out our Facebook page for a clip on that. You can also check out researchthenews.com. That has a link to all of our former videos, our podcast links, and all kinds of other stuff, information about us. And it links to our Wikipedia page, which is researchthenews.org, which has episode notes, and every article we talk about today is posted there. So you can verify us because we are researching the news and you should be researching the news, and you can check all of these articles out. We also have research the news research the news. We have all kinds. We, again, as a podcast mogul with dozens and dozens of listeners, we have all kinds of pages.
Dozens.
All right. And sometimes we're actually going to bring on a guest this week. Caitlin is now joining us. Hello, Caitlin.
Hi, everyone.
So some weeks we're going to have disagreements, and I actually have mentioned this before. I want to have more hardcore disagreements where we really get into some battles, but still in a loving way. This week, we're probably going to learn something from Caitlin. So to give you a little background, we're talking about prison reform this week, and Caitlin and I actually spent some time in a Mexican prison together. So Caitlin, do you want to tell that story about how we spent time in a Mexican prison, or would you like me to tell it?
I don't know. Are you ready to divulge what we did to end up in a Mexican prison?
I will say there's a question on dating profiles you throw up there that you were in a Mexican prison. You get a lot of questions. It's a great conversation starter. I think it's probably, in hindsight, a lot of people swiped left on me from that, but it's a good opening line. We actually were in Mexico to build a medical center, and there was about 30 of us on the trip total.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
And they asked us if we wanted to go tour a prison, and 3 of us went. Everyone else was kind of afraid to go. And I ended up playing some basketball there with the inmates, and we had a really good time. I loved it. I thought it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, it was great. And we were just in an open area with them too. It wasn't, we didn't see them in their cells. I think we were just sitting outside and talking and learning Spanish. I think we were trying to improve our Spanish. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to learn Spanish. You actually knew some. I knew none. I took 2 years of French in high school, and I still know no French. So, but yeah, it was a very interesting experience. We got to learn more about what Mexican prisons were like, and I'm not sure if that led into your choice of careers. But every week we play "What's Your Bias?" We talk about some of the biases we have going into a conversation, and I think that's a good time for you to explain to the listeners why we talked to you about being on the show this week. What your experience in the prison system is.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So my background, my undergrad was in sociology. And so I did some studying about prisons and always found them interesting, but did not at the time think that that was going to be my career. I did some other social work for a while and then ended up going to seminary, which is a different story in itself. But it was through my time at seminary that I had the opportunity to go visit a jail. And this was after we had gone to the Mexican prison, but this was our local jail. And on the same day, I was interviewing for potential field education experiences. And one of those was in the jail as well. And I will tell you that the moment I stepped into the jail, I thought, this is why I'm in seminary. Wow. I can't explain it, except it just felt like it was the place I was meant to be. So not also something you hear from people a lot.
No, not often,
I stepped into a jail and that's where I wanted to be. I had a job that I want them to no longer need, a job that I loved but wish did not exist. So I started as an intern with the Foundation of Hope and was a volunteer there for 3 years. And then I became the director of the pre-release program, which is a rehabilitative program within Allegheny County Jail. And just left there this past summer to take on a call as a solo pastor. So my bias is that I am certainly liberal leaning, although I tend to tell people that I'm sort of conservative in my own personal views and liberal in my social views, what I want for others and the government. But I will say that working in the jail, instead of pushing me further in one direction, I think it opened up to me a lot more of the concept of nuance and how much more complicated every issue really is. And that was something that was surprising to me. So maybe my problem for being on your show is that my bias is I'm going to see too many sides of each issue.
Well, I think this is a good episode to learn something. And I think going into my bias, I tend to be a conservative person when it comes to fiscal things. And when it comes to social things, I tend to be more libertarian. We've talked about this before. As long as you aren't bothering other people, I tend to want to be hands off. But I feel like the expectation when someone says they tend to be conservative is we want more people in prison and it's all the prisoner's fault. And so when I look at this specific issue, I take a conservative viewpoint on some things like the Constitution and how that's involved with prisons and why people are in prisons. I look at finances and how much money we're spending. And so I think if you looked from the scale of what people typically think are liberal or conservative, a lot of people just kind of ignore the issue in prisons. I think there are some solutions that we should be working towards. And although I do think there are some people that, maybe can't be rehabilitated, and that's sad for me to hear. I think there's some people that just are beyond it. I think there are way too many people in prisons to begin with. And we can talk about why that's happening and the history behind it. But I have some what I think are talking points for conservatives as to why people who are conservative and identify as conservative might want to get behind prison reform to help everyone. So that's my bias. Gretchen?
I tend to live in the liberal place a lot across the board. And when I think about prison reform, I don't have a lot of people close to me that have been in prison. There's probably been a handful. I think my larger group base of friends and family are more wealthy. I don't have a lot of friends that are in poverty. Those that are, I think I've listened more to their friends, so and their experiences. So that has kind of informed my way of thinking in terms of mass incarceration. Their family members who have gone through the prison system and what it's been like. But personally, I don't have a lot of people in my personal life that have gone through it, and I think, especially where I grew up, a lot of us don't. And I'm really looking forward today just learning more about it and even just looking up stats and things that I wanted to find out, which will probably end up answering all my questions before I even have a chance to ask them while we talk.
Lots of pressure on you, Caitlin. You have to actually not only
no kidding.
But I think
teach us
the
about
things
it,
that,
but
even when we were kind of
saying.
pre-talking before we even came on, I was like, oh my gosh, she's totally answering my questions right now. I think I want my eyes to be further open. And I hope that that's how a lot of people will come into, looking about just things in general, going forward. But I think this is something that really impacts people's lives on such a huge scale, and one little thing can just demolish someone's life. So, I'm coming from that place. So, naturally I want people to have the best outcome that they could possibly have. Even if, like we were saying, they are not being able to be rehabilitated, but looking at even that, like, and what are the ways that we can exhaust that before we write somebody off.
And I will say, so we're going to start out with some definitions. And I would just like to point out that I have learned everything I know about prison reform by the all-time great social justice leader, Kim Kardashian. So everything I say is coming from, no, I'm kidding. But there are a lot of articles, again, at researchthenews.org. It's our Wikipedia page, things that Gretchen had researched and things that I had researched. You can go there, and some of the stats will be saying we're not just pulling them out of the air. We actually have some reasoning as to where they came from. So check that out. Caitlin, I think a good start is to define jails versus prisons, because I think it's one of the basic things that a lot of people don't understand. And what is the difference between a jail and a prison?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll hear different terms, and sometimes they're used interchangeably, but typically jails are where you are going to go if you are arrested. So if you have an incident with a police officer, pulls you over, takes you in, you're going to go to the jail. Now, some people will not make it what they call upstairs. You just get released, don't actually get processed. But if you do get processed and stay in the facility, that is where you are going to wait until you have your court date, or until you plea out, or until you're able to post bail. So there are many things that can happen once you're in the jail, but you are not guilty for the most part, at least yet. I would say it's typically about 10 to 20% of people in jails that have been found guilty and are serving a sentence, which would be considered a county sentence. So all jails are run by counties. So the other main thing to know there is that they are all run differently. Every county has its own way of running its facility, and there's not really any consistency across the board on that. So if you're serving a county sentence, it's going to be less than 2 years. So people that are there typically are not there for more than 2 years. People that are waiting to be sentenced, many do plea out. That's what it's called when you say you're guilty and take some kind of plea deal. They are typically still there for about 3 months. It usually takes about 3 months to see a judge just to get to the plea. If you decide that you want to actually go to trial, it's going to take at least 6 months to be able to see a judge for trial, and it's going to take at least a year to see to have a trial by jury. And I say at least, but it's usually a lot longer than that. We had a guy who was in for 3 years before his trial even occurred, which is not how it is supposed to happen, but it does happen. So that's jails. And then the prisons are either state or federal. And sometimes they're called state correctional institutions or federal institutions. Those are run more consistently for the most part. Pennsylvania oversees all the state facilities. Federal oversees that. And that would be anywhere over 2 years. Where you go, though, is not necessarily based on where you're from. So somebody from Pittsburgh is not going to go to a prison that is close. They go based on numbers, type of offense, classification, all kinds of different things. And then we also have the federal immigration facilities, which are a whole different story.
Well, there's a lot to unpack just from that, including I think something in the First Step Act tried to address the distance that was involved, but
I was thinking that too.
I think there's so much to unpack, but I want to start out by talking about something that's important to me. My definition is recidivism, and basically that is a person's relapse back into criminal behavior, and that most often references going back to jail for a new crime after you're released. So you get out of jail and then you go right back to prison, and that's something when you look at those rates, there are some countries who do it better than others. There are some cities and states and there are all kinds of different rates of recidivism. And I think that's an important number to drop down. And I will say something going back to something that Gretchen brought up. I know you had said, from a liberal perspective, like I want people to have the best outcomes. And I think that's something that just is, as someone who does tend to come from a conservative background, even times where people have messed up in the prison system, I think there are some people who did it on purpose. And we'll talk about some of those issues where people were using the prison system for their personal benefit. But I think there's an interesting story to look at Ben Franklin's one of my all-time favorite people in history, and he's a weird dude in some ways, and he's a really brilliant guy in others. But when you look at the first penitentiary in the U.S., it was Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, and it was the first time they had basically people confined individually, and it was basically solitary confinement every day. And you can actually still tour the prison, and they have even Halloween horrors there. But it's a really cool place to check out. But they call it a penitentiary because the Quaker view was do your penitence and learn and grow. Now, putting someone in solitary confinement for basically 23 hours a day, I think it was, in hindsight, with history behind us, we go, okay, that's not really a great way to make people change their ways. But the intent was actually good. Not all intent is good when it comes to the prison system. Not all of the intent is good in a lot of things. But I think that's something to look through the lens of not everything that's bad in the system was done purposely wrong. But we have to look at, okay, is it time to change it? That's something I'm big on. And I think, again, from a conservative perspective, we should be saying, okay, if it doesn't work, let's just not keep doing it. Let's reassess and see if it's beneficial. And if not, let's change it and make it better. So, and the goal is to get people who leave prison to be able to be beneficial members of society and have the opportunity to change, or in the first place, not actually going to prison to begin with. So now that we have that down, Caitlin,
can I make a correction?
Oh, yes. Go ahead. Hit me.
A quick correction. So, or maybe more clarification, but when you talk about recidivism, I think it's important for people to know that does not necessarily mean that someone has gone back to criminal behavior. Recidivism can be measured by reincarceration, which means they were going back to jail. It could be reoffending, which means they did commit another offense. But more often than not, it is parole violations.
I was just going to say,
There's something in Allegheny County Jail, almost half of the people that were there, at least pre-COVID. When COVID came, they released a lot of people with more minor things. So that may have changed the numbers. But at least pre-COVID, about half of the people were there for parole violations. And that could be not reporting, and sometimes that's purposeful. But again, talking about intent, sometimes it's you can't get a bus where you need to go, or you can't get away from your job. Maybe people didn't send in their new address. So a lot of times it is not necessarily that someone has gone back to crime. It is that they're back in the system.
Gotcha. All right. Well, good clarification. When we talked before the show, we went over some topics we thought would be interesting, and something you brought up, we talk about corporate prison system. And I actually want to talk more about that because I think it's something a lot of people just see prison as, here's a government institution that when you're bad, you go to it and you pay your crime and then you leave. That's not actually the case. They're not always run by the government. Do you know that? And I don't want to throw stats on you, but do you know like an estimate of how many prisons are actually run by states versus private institutions?
So I did look that up, and I am just trying to find the number. So I know that that's changing because of Biden's recent executive order. He wants to phase out all federal contracts. It's going to take some time, but it said that about 77%. Oh, no, that's the increase. Hold on.
Do you want me to play some music in the background? I can hum some waiting music, like elevator music.
Yes, I should have put this. This tells people, not numbers of facilities. So basically, it's saying that it was about, and since 2000, they increased the use of private prison contracts by 77%. Okay. So that tells how much. I don't have the numbers of how many there are, but quite a few. And I do think it's also important to note that even prisons and jails that are not privately funded still use private dollars. It is a big industrial complex.
So talk a little bit about that, because one of the things you brought up was the Starbucks aprons. And I feel like these are those little anecdotes from someone who's been in the clink, as Michael Scott would call it. But I feel like that's something that I wouldn't have known about Starbucks. And again, it goes back to intent. It looks good in the corporate paperwork. We're helping prisons by paying prisoners to make aprons. But tell me a little bit about what happens with the Starbucks aprons in a prison system.
Yes. And I want to confirm that this Starbucks apron is an example I had that I saw in their stores years ago. So I cannot confirm that they still use it, but I do know many other groups I can tell you that definitely do something along these lines. Basically what it is that a company, if they purchase a lot of equipment, so for Starbucks, their aprons that their baristas wear, they can set up a contract with one of these private prisons where they are purchasing their aprons at very low cost that are made by inmates, and they sell it as a positive within their company. So when I saw it, it was on a pretty little brochure. This is how we help fight recidivism. We offer our aprons are made from prisoners who are going through a program to learn job training. What is not shared is that those inmates are making sometimes as low as just a few cents an hour. Sometimes it's just, at best, it's usually a couple dollars an hour, if that. For some places, you work to get better food. In Allegheny County Jail, our workers get a different housing unit and they get extra food trays. So that's about it. You're not getting money. And then the other problem with that is that these private prisons are run like businesses. And so in order to meet their demands, they need to have workers. And so there is no incentive for them to be rehabilitating people. They want more people, and they will sell that, in their languages online. They'll say, we're hoping to increase beds by 20,000 in 2022 and use that language. But those beds mean people. We are hoping to put more people into our facilities so that we can increase our profits, essentially. Yeah. And what's really shocking is how many companies do this. And when I first learned that, the big names that you hear are CCA and GEO. So you can look up the GEO group or CCA, which is, I think it's something of America. I can't remember now, but CCA and GEO. And you would be shocked by how many people use them. McDonald's, Chevron, Exxon, banks that you've heard of, Blue Cross and Blue Shield has used things for them. Pretty much any major company that you can think of, you would probably find Fruit of the Loom, AT&T, Mary Kay,
well, that makes
Quaker
sense.
Oats. There's just all kinds.
Mary Kay, I feel like they're part of the whole pyramid scheme thing. So it seems like they would be the perfect culprit for being involved
like,
in
somebody
this.
We don't have to pay. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that's interesting to me. So if you look at this, so I love the Constitution and the history of it. And there's a great podcast that's also linked on the website called Constitutional from the Washington Post. And there was an episode there about the 13th Amendment. And I'm just going to read this real quick here. The 13th Amendment said neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except, just to be clear, this is the one that freed the slaves, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And so basically that's saying no slaves unless you've been incarcerated and convicted. Now, I think that initially there was a lot worse things happening than just Starbucks. That is not minimizing Starbucks at all. But when you look at things like the Parchman Farm, it's also linked on our webpage. It's actually, they tell the story in this Constitutional podcast. Parchman Farm was basically a plantation that once the 13th Amendment was ratified, started using convict lease systems. So they would lease convicts, bring them to a plantation, make them pick cotton, give them whatever food that they would have had if they were slaves, and kept people there. Now, it did expand beyond just Black Americans. Eventually, when they started running low, they started adding white Americans as well. But there were often people who, were accused of minor crimes and thrown in here because the government was not losing money by having convicts, but they were gaining money by sending them to plantations. So it was really, it was a way to get around it.
Incentive,
now, when I see things like Starbucks, I actually would be all for a system like Starbucks and them making money and helping prisoners if they were doing it in a way that led to something that was worthwhile after prison and something that actually changed lives. And is there anything that you know of that you've seen that's a program in our prisons in the US that has been something that's helped that, whether it's with a corporate partner or otherwise, just something that's helped learn life skills or job skills or something that can get people out of that cycle?
Yeah, it's tough because I agree with you. I think that the reason it works and so many companies are sold by it, not just for saving money, but those that really, I think, have good intentions, as you mentioned earlier. We want to be able to help and make a difference. And it sounds like you are. But even inmates who have learned the skill of sewing while in jail are really hesitant to put that on applications. You know, a job in a jail doesn't translate quite the same way. Now, sometimes that's us as a society that needs to change. We need to be willing to actually see that as a skill. But there are places that do it better. In Allegheny County Jail, part of their reentry program works with what they call the machine shop, and they work with a organization that teaches machining. And so that is something where they can actually get certified and actually get well-paying jobs. So, you know, we knew some people that went through the facility, and when they got out, they were making more than they had ever made, you know, and those are the kind of things that I think work. Often, though, that is nonprofit organizations that are doing that. I'm sure it could happen with private funded organizations, but I have not seen that. Although I am just here at Allegheny County Jail. What is surprising to me, and was surprising to me when I first got in, is how little rehabilitation there is. I had the wrong assumption. You go into a prison and people are hopefully doing things to try to make them change, you know, learn some good skills, learn whatever. And in Allegheny County Jail, when I started, really the only program was the Foundation of Hope, which had one designated pod out of 32. A pod is a housing unit. So out of 32, there was one that was meant to be helping rehabilitate people, and another that was for drug and alcohol. We now have 4, because there's a veterans pod and there's also the reentry program. But 4 out of 32 is still a pretty bad number. And most people are in there playing cards, watching TV, not a lot else.
Yeah. And I think that's something, I mean, we look at a place, one thing that I have a problem with when we look at politics in general is often we compare ourselves to places like, you know, Denmark for healthcare. And it's like, okay, well, when you're comparing healthcare, you're comparing 330 million people who are widely varied in their demographics with a country with like 2 million people. So when I make this assessment, just know that when it's a country that's a lot smaller than us, and they don't have as much of an high as an incarceration rate, but Norway has the Norwegian model. And I watched a documentary about how they really spend time to rehabilitate. What do you think? I mean, it's tough because as someone, I think when you look at our prison system, again, talking about fiscal conservatism, we spend anywhere, their estimates are $80 to $182 billion a year on prisons throughout the US. So my mindset goes to, I think we can probably spend that more wisely and hopefully cut down the incarceration or the recidivism rate, which on a side note is one of the hardest words I've ever tried to pronounce. And I feel like every time I say it, I'm about to mess it up. But recidivism. Every time
I read it, my brain does cartwheels.
Yeah, it's difficult. I'm so glad I've got through it so far. But about half of that money goes to staff. So it's really a giant lobby as well with this prison system. So it's not just the corporations making money, but half of that money is estimated to go to staff. And on top of that, I mean, that doesn't include things like, I think we spend $50 billion a year on the war on drugs. And if you're a longtime listener, you know my love for Tupac, and what he says in his song is, you got a war on poverty. Instead of a war on poverty, you have a war on drugs so the police can bother me. And I feel like we've been spending $50 billion a year for 30, 40 years now on the war on drugs. And again, it's one of those things that initially it had good intent. Let's get drugs off the street. But clearly it's become now this whole giant, like most government things, becomes a giant ball of money that just keeps getting thrown at a problem and not really solving it. So all of that being said, I think from a conservative standpoint here, I think if you talk often about not liking public welfare and healthcare, I don't think lock them up should be a rallying cry. And I think we should be kind of switching back to how do we help people avoid prison, and how do we help people once they're in prison? So what I'm asking you, Caitlin, with that intro is what can we do as it's all on you. I told you there's high pressure. We have such great expectations for you. If there was something, and we talk at the end of every episode about something we can do moving forward, but do you have what have you seen that's worked well, even from those nonprofit organizations where you've seen some kind of benefit? What would be something that if you were president of the prison systems, all of them, and you could do whatever you wanted, what would be your first move to try to change something? You don't know how much
of a dream that is, Ray. My coworkers and I would frequently say, well, if we ran the place, and no disrespect to those who run our county jail. I will say that in Allegheny County, they have made huge strides, even in the time that I was there. And some things that I think have worked is the dedicated court systems. So they set up mental health court, a veterans court, what they call Pride Court, which deals primarily with sex workers. They have dual diagnosis, which is people with mental health and addiction issues. And those really do make a difference, because what happens is when people go before courts that are set up to their needs, so a veteran is going to go before a judge that understands what the veteran's needs are. And instead of saying you're going to be sentenced for 2 years, they'll say, okay, we're going to have you go through this counseling at the VA. We're going to make sure that you do have to report, but that we're going to have someone with you who can help you find the employment that you need, so forth. So specialized courts, I think, are a big deal. I also think that we need to, it's really one of those issues that you have to hit at all sides. So I will take my bias here and plug my old foundation, because I do think that they are, not only think it is true, they are pretty much the agency in Pittsburgh to deal with rehabilitation and just any kind of jail prison ministry. So Foundation of Hope does a lot of great work, but I think why they are so impactful is because they are working in the jails and they are working after people leave. And they're also working with a new program called Diversion, which has been around just for a couple years, but is really exciting. And what that is doing is looking for alternatives to incarceration in the first place. Because what you mentioned,
wonderful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. What you mentioned, Ray, is so true, that the war on drugs really just completely changed our prison system hugely. And even if you look at a cost, if you want to take it from the conservative point of view, if I found a statistic that if only 10% of drug addicted offenders got drug rehab instead of jail time, the criminal justice system would save $4.8 billion. If 40% of addicted offenders, it rises to 12.9. And 2/3 of people that are incarcerated are there for some sort of addiction issue, whether they're selling narcotics or it's their addiction that led them to whatever crime it was, whether it's assault or robbery or prostitution. It really is behind a lot of the behaviors that you would see in the criminal justice field. So that is a huge thing. I think that we really have to target, what are we trying to do? Are we just trying to lock people away? Because that doesn't last forever either. People get released and there are neighbors. There are people that we go to work with, that we see in schools. And so do we actually want people to have an opportunity to grow and change and address the things that have gone on for them? And then it's how we perceive people in society when they have been incarcerated in their past. That is another huge thing. There is so much shame and there is so many barriers for people that are coming out of incarceration. Thankfully, Pennsylvania passed a ban the box ballot a while ago, which was you had to check a box on your application. You know, have you ever been not just incarcerated, but have you ever committed a felony? And some people would just see that and not even interview. But often when you go to the interview stage with someone, they can tell you their story of how they have changed and why they were there and what they've learned and how long ago it was and all of those different things. People lose their driver's license when they've been in there. That prohibits people from going to work. So there are all these barriers that we need to be able to address as well. I'll save my one for the end, but that can be a start for you.
Well, I think that's a good start.
Some of the things to change.
I think this is something I want to talk to you about a little bit deeper, because I have some conflicted feelings about what you said. I think in general, I agree. But when it talks about even the ban the box, I think that really helps people who are in jail. But knowing from personal experience, good friends of mine who were in jail and were addicted, and things that happened to both myself and friends of mine, seeing firsthand what happens when they relapse. I've had family members that have gone through this. And so it's tough, because I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't get an opportunity because they were in jail and they deserve it. And at the same time, as an employer, I have a small business, and every employee, it costs a lot of money to hire and get them up to speed. And it's something that it's a tough line. So how do you balance? I agree that helps the felons and it's good, but also how do you balance the needs of people to know who they're hiring? Because is there a system where maybe it's certain degrees of crimes that you have to announce? Because felonies could be all I don't know. I don't know how you handle this, but that's something where I go, okay, I hear the motivation behind it is good, but then on the opposite side, what happens to those employers if the relapse happens? And you don't want to assume the worst, but from personal experience, the worst has happened several times with people in my life.
Yeah, I completely understand that too, because being in the system and knowing and loving a great number of people who are in the system, I saw wonderful success. And I also saw some heartbreaking things where people did not end up succeeding the way that we hoped, or, even hurt themselves or others. And that is a tough challenge because there's so much going on in someone's life when they're leaving. For a lot of people that are in jail, they have mental health issues that they really need to address, that they don't have relationships that we have to rely on to build social skills, that kind of thing. But my question for you, it doesn't answer your question really, but it's a pushback to your question.
It's a good politician move. We're answering a question with a question. I like it. Yeah.
Is how do you know with anyone what you're answering, who you are hiring? I mean, you are judging based on an interview and a piece of paper. And some people have had years of education to be able to sell themselves as a good employee, but that person could rob your company of all kinds of money, it's really hard to say. And so I think that delves into a bigger issue of how do we better understand each other? How do we do tests to see what we really need? Maybe we need to change our interview system in some ways also, because there are things that we don't have to divulge. You might not ask, you couldn't ask in an interview, are you on psychiatric medication, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I can even tell you I am, I think that can be a good thing, but it also could be a sign of something that might come up in the workplace that could be difficult to handle.
True. And I will address that directly instead of asking you a question back. I'm trying very hard to answer directly. I think that's one of the things where I think there's some bias there because, again, I have had family members and I've had good friends. And when I say good friends, I'm not talking about tertiary friends that are in my circle. Specific instances with very good friends that really hurt because people in general, I don't like when people lie to me. That's a big thing for me personally. And seeing someone that you put a lot of hope and faith into, that forget about a work situation, even a personal situation, that's where it gets a little tricky for me, where it's tough. And I think that's something I think one of the things in the show we want to do is recognizing the legitimacy of the other side. And I think that is something where there's got to be some discussion on that. I think most people can get behind, we want less people in prisons. Depending on, people may disagree on how you get to less people in prisons, but the end result of having less people in prisons would be good for everyone. And I think one of the things you brought up though, in your question to my question, the whole mentorship part of it, I think that's a big thing where, there are programs out there. One of the people I had interactions with was going through NA and AA after they got out. I didn't know initially that they were actually in jail when I became friends with them. But as I got to know them better, they told me more about their past, and then things just kind of went downhill. But there were those support systems there, but something happens, there's a trigger and it just goes off a cliff. And I think that's something where there's a bigger discussion there about what that actually means. And I think that's one of the things I get frustrated about in politics is when people are either saying, you got to have it on there and we're not going to hire those felons and they're never going to change. And that's one mindset. And the other mindset is I want the best for everyone and I want to think the best of everyone, but not everyone is going to make those wise choices. And that just goes back. I worked in the inner city for a while with kids who came from pretty difficult backgrounds. And I had so much, I've talked about this before, but so much patience for the kids who messed up, but were trying to get better. And I had like no patience for the kids who were just trying to pull one over on me. And unfortunately, especially when it comes to addiction, it's really hard to distinguish who's pulling one over because some people who are pulling one over on you, personal experience, do a really good job of pulling them one over on you. So
no, that's 100.
Go ahead. Good.
No, I'm breaking the rules of Research the News. I interrupted you. I apologize. Right.
No interruptions without correction. So, and I actually stopped. Sometimes that's one of my tics. Not only, I think I've stopped saying like now, but anytime there's silence, instead of saying like, I'm just going to start something new. So it's good you interrupted me or else I would want another side tangent. So, Gretchen, do you have any, now you heard both of our sides here. I was thinking
whenever you guys were discussing that, and I understand both sides of this. I understand the thought of the, independent, business worker or business owner that's trying to hire their employees and wanting to make sure that they have the right employees. One of the things that I had read about was expungement of their, crimes after a certain period of time. So 7 years or 10 years down the road, unfortunately, that doesn't help them right when they get out. And that's the really crappy part, but it could help them in the future. So if they're doing a really good job, and I think a lot of there's a lot of social groups online that when I was doing all my research, they're calling for these Congress and state governments to expand expungements and even looking at sealings for sealing records so that people aren't constantly being hurt by a bad decision that they made, especially if they're going through a good behavior, right? So if they've come out and they're being a productive member of society, that they're not being held responsible for something they did a long, long time ago, whenever it doesn't.
Well, I think that, sorry, I'm going to just real quick here. That's something I can definitely get behind. I think that oftentimes we talked about this with the cancel culture episode. You get in trouble for something you said 30 years ago. And I think this goes along the same way. And the principle is the same here. If you've done your time, and that goes, I mean, we already have that for, credit reports. I think it's 7 or 8 years. Then you get that expunged from your record if you did something in the past. And I mean, clearly if it's murder, I feel like that should be on there for time or something with children. But in general, if it's a minor crime, I could definitely see an expungement. So that's actually, I think that's a very good point. And Caitlin, do you have any thoughts on that specifically?
I have so many thoughts. I'm all over the place. I can talk about this stuff for days and weeks and years.
Well, good. Everyone watching, buckle in for a 7-hour episode. So.
No, just, call me later. We'll flash my cell phone. Not really. But I mean, this is where I can admit my bias as well. I mean, I come from the place, being a pastor also, what you both said is completely true. Nobody wants to be judged for your worst moment, right? If we all had to write the worst thing we've ever done on a job application, imagine those interviews.
I would never get a job. Ray would have never hired me.
Caitlin knew me in my early 20s, so I was, I'm sure you have a list that probably could get me canceled right now. So
no. But I think it goes even beyond that because, you've said as a caveat, Ray, well, what if they've committed murder? Then it's different. Or some of the worst cases, when I worked in the jail, I was working with people that were sex offenders that had committed murder. I mean, we worked with people no matter what their crime was. And the reason for that and where I come from is we are all human beings and we all have within us the capability to have done any of these same things. And if any of us think that we are above that, we're just wrong. We have had different experiences and different lives, and we have not been put into that situation. Someone once said something that I love. They said, well, if I were you, I would have done, how we tend to say, if I were you, I would have done it this way.
Right.
But you know what? If you were me, you would have done exactly what I did because you'd be me.
Yeah. And that's actually perfect.
I love thinking that because, we really cannot say for other people. And so from the pastoral perspective, I think we're all broken and we all deserve to have another chance. I deeply believe in second chances, third chances, 25th chances, Lord knows I've been given them. So I think what is also important to remember, as I said before, is no matter who the person is, really, even sometimes for things like sex offenses and murders, they're coming back out. We want people to come back out as healthier, more whole people. And so a big part of the work too is not seeing it when somebody's incarcerated as you have to suffer this time. It is, how can we convince you during this time that your life matters and that we can help you have that desire to love and be loved and do something, positive in this world and heal from the past that you've had as well.
Yeah. A former student of mine. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Gretchen.
I'm going to say, because I thought whenever you were talking about mental health for inmates, a former student of mine, she was a dancer and theater student when I taught her in college. She ended up going to grad school for drama therapy and movement therapy. And so she works with incarcerated individuals. She also works in Chicago in the cancer ward for the children's ward. But she told me amazing stories about being in the jail and working with individuals. And I was just wondering if you could talk about anything that you've seen kind of that was working in the jails that you were in, or even programs that you could see being beneficial while they're incarcerated.
Absolutely. And I will tell you that in terms of inmates and wanting programs, I mean, almost across the board, people want it. Again, I would say it's probably like maybe 10% of people who are incarcerated are just they're still fully in that criminal life. They really don't want to have something different. But other people, they're in there. I heard all the time, I'd interview people to come to our program, and stories from, I just want to be a better parent. I want to learn something new. I need to get some more education, whatever it is. And so whenever we brought any program in, people just ate it up. I mean, so we didn't have dance, but we did have yoga.
Oh, great.
Which was really powerful. Yeah. We also had a lot of meditation, and there's a lot of studies about how powerful meditation can be for people incarcerated. We did have art therapy. We had all kinds of different things. So I think it depends on the person and what they're drawn to in terms of what works, quote unquote works. And I think that's what makes the system so difficult, because like all of us humans, we all have different specific needs. And so there's not always that, this is the exact formula. The work is hard because it is complicated work. We really need to be looking again in that holistic kind of view, which I think that programs like the diversion program do. They're saying somebody's would normally be arrested for this crime, but what's behind that? What is the reason that led them to this? Now let's target some of those behaviors or put in some supports that can actually affect this individual. That's not just a cookie cutter thing.
Yeah. Are those similar things that a lot of local jurisdictions are trying to get? What are they called? Bench cards, where for judges, so that they can ask specific questions when sentencing, so that they're able to adequately look at the person that's sitting in front of them and not just have like mandatory minimum. This is what you do for this crime. Right. Have you heard anything about those or?
So I actually haven't. So you stumped me there. I believe you that it exists, but I've just not heard about bench cards.
Yeah. It was an interesting concept to me, because I thought, it's like how are judges supposed to like look at this person and not treat them all the same, especially when you're looking at smaller areas. I lived in Morgantown, West Virginia, and it's very, very small. So, I mean, it's even a big city for West Virginia, but it was very small. I think there was probably only a handful of judges for the area. So when they're dealing with people coming in front of them and they are cookie cutter offenses, but you're looking at the person rather. And when you were talking about that, I was like, this is amazing. And I thought, and then I remembered the bench cards, and I didn't know if it was a thing that you were aware of.
I may just not have heard the term. I mean, that's another one where
it was called. I'm almost positive.
Well, it might be. It completely could be. But that's another thing that can be a little bit challenging, because yes, we want to be able to have people tailored to their specific situation. However, when you give it completely to subjectivity of judges, what can also happen is some judges are extremely lenient, some are extremely non-lenient. They actually did studies where they looked at sentencing before judges went to lunch and after judges had eaten lunch, and much harsher sentences when they were approaching their lunchtime.
Wow. That makes total
much
sense.
More lenient right after lunch. So it is a careful path
I
to
didn't
trod,
even think about something like that, because you think you get hangry, and then you start taking it out on people. My ex-husband does that.
I think that leads into something else that we had talked about before, and I did a little research on, and I think I'm going to go back to the Constitution. There's a Sixth Amendment, and in the Sixth Amendment, it talks about our right to trials, and it starts out with, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. And I got to say, I got to couch this with this week, I think because we were coming up on this episode, I had a dream that I was in prison. It was horrifying. I don't have bad dreams. And I woke up like I was in a prison cell. I didn't have any contact. I think it was, I don't know how long I was actually there in my dream, but it was terrible. And I woke up and actually affected by it. And when I think about what you're saying with people being in jail for 3 years awaiting trial, I looked up some numbers about the average time people are in jail. And one of the things that's tricky for me is it says specifically we need a speedy trial, but it doesn't say how long that is. And now I couldn't find new numbers. We talked about this, but Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2000, those numbers were about 6 months for the date of arrest to felony conviction. And jury cases were 9 months as an average time. So that could go a lot longer. And when I think about myself, I mean, growing up, I didn't grow up with a lot of money. And even though I would be able to afford a lawyer now or afford bail and hopefully be able to get out, depending on, of course, what crime I did, it's still something where I even think about the money that I made. And I think when you grow up poor, you kind of grow up with a mentality of someone who grew up in the Great Depression, where you have money, you're like, I'm afraid to spend it. Like that's me. I still shop at Aldi, which you could tell by our sponsorship last week. I love deals. And so the thought of giving
that's where we all agree.
100%. And for my company, I have to pay lawyers, and I hate paying them because we're paying them $300 an hour to do basic stuff that we could probably all do ourselves. And so the thought of trying to find a good attorney is tough. And also we say that we're going to provide an attorney, but usually those aren't great attorneys. And if you look at the amount of money that's been spent on attorneys for public defenders, that's been going down over the years. So to me, that's something, again, as someone who is a conservative person and who does really enjoy the fact that we have this Constitution, which gives us all these rights, it's something we should be fighting for, is the fact that these trials should be speedy. And hopefully, again, I think there's a balance here where if we start maybe weaning off of the war on drugs and starting to tame that monster, we can put more of that money into things like public defenders, which then keeps people out of jail, which then we don't have to spend money on all those expenses, and it wouldn't go in their record. So I think there's a lot of things here that can kind of come together. But you had shocked me with that. What was it? 3 years someone waited from the time they were convicted.
Insane.
Is that typically because they just can't afford bail? Is that why they're in jail that long?
That was a special situation. They waited for a jury trial, which lasts, usually it can be around a year. I think theirs was a little longer, but then they ended up having a mistrial. So that's why theirs ended up being so long. So it was,
and they don't go home after the mistrial. They stay in jail.
I feel like, that's where it's like totally shocking to me that there's not some kind of program that would help.
I feel like that's something we should all know, but that's shocking to me. I thought you went home.
That is shocking.
And then
the other
came back later.
The other thing you should know, and I want to share 2 stories about this, but the other thing you should know is if you go to jail and you're found not guilty, you are still going to face a lot of the same challenges. We had a guy who waited for a judge trial. So he was in for 8 months and found not guilty. It was actually a self-defense situation. He's a big guy, and he had somebody come up to mug him at night, and he happened to have a knife on him. And so when this guy was trying to rob him and hurt him, he ended up stabbing this guy, not killing him, but hurting the other guy. So he ended up being found not guilty. It was self-defense, but he lost his job during that time. He lost his house. The county doesn't say, we're so sorry that we took this time from you. Here's some money. No, people, especially why so many people plea and take the plea after 3 months is because they have a family to support on the outside. Not only are they missing out on their own income, but they have people who are depending on them, and they have to pay for some things in jail. That's another surprising thing that I didn't know. You get soap when you're in the county jail, but you don't get toothpaste, you don't get shampoo, you don't get conditioner, you don't get lotion. You do get feminine products. You do get razors that you have to share and check out, but anything you want, envelopes that you send home, that all adds up. So a lot of people leave jail owing money, and it stays on your system. So if you come back in, you owe that money, and they'll take that off your books if people put money in there. So there's a lot of reasons. And it can really mess people up. I know we're low on time, so I'll just say I have a very, very quick story of a guy that was in for a year, was found not guilty. And the reason he was found not guilty was it was a string of robberies, and the guy committed another one while he was incarcerated. So they knew it wasn't him. Yeah. He ended up suing the county, and he lost. Wow. And it ended up triggering back some of his addiction issues. And he got in a terrible car accident and actually suffered some brain damage. And he's a completely different person now. And so those are the kind of things that can happen that I don't think we think through.
No.
But of that line, right, I mean, cash bail is the issue here. It's that people have to stay in jail. For me, if I got arrested, I could wait at home. You don't post your whole bond, but you can post a percentage, or you can have a bail bondsman, whatever. And hopefully found not guilty, and it didn't change my life, but for people who have to be in there 3 months, that can change your life.
Right. I mean, 3 months without a paycheck for a lot of people would just, that alone would change your life.
We all kind of understand that because of COVID. It's like, could you imagine having to deal with that? That's crazy.
There was, so the First Step Act happened. It was finally some kind of prison reform bill that passed. I'm correct me if I'm wrong. I thought there were some things in there about feminine products. I thought there were some things in there about the distance from where you were incarcerated from where you were, where you live. What are your thoughts on the First Step Act? And was it, I know it's the first step, but was it something that made a positive impact, or was it more politician speak where it sounded good, but wasn't very impactful?
So unfortunately, that is one, Ray, I did not look up before this. So it's because I'm caught up in different acts and different things, I can't say as much. But if small changes do make a difference. I mean, I will say that even if they are small changes, they make a huge difference for people who are incarcerated. You know, to not have feminine products. I mean, that's something maybe only women can understand, but that's a huge,
I was actually shocked by that. I did not know that was a thing. And I think one of the things that they talked about in the First Step Act where something that was surprising to me was that they stopped shackling women who are pregnant to a table when they're giving birth. And I mean, as a man, I'm so glad that I never have to experience that pain of childbirth. And I'm sure it's a very vulnerable moment. And to be shackled while I was doing it, that just, I mean, I don't know if they expected women to run during that time. I don't know what the whole motivation was, but
basically, if you have any medical issue while you're in jail, if it's very minor, it can be treated at a clinic, but typically they're going to transfer you to a hospital. And the entire time you're in the hospital, you will be shackled to a bed and you will have guards by your door. So that is typical, unfortunately. Yeah. But I would say that the big thing is really to advocate for ending cash bail. And we actually in Allegheny County, our county jail is run by what's called a jail oversight board. And this is a tip for anybody listening. If you're interested in this, anyone is allowed to attend jail oversight board meetings. Any person in the world can go and attend. And so you can learn about things. You can help advocate for things. That is the best place to bring concerns. If you shout outside of the jail, that honestly doesn't help anybody. And sometimes it hurts the prisoners because they will get locked down during a protest. And so they'll be, but if you go to jail oversight board meetings, you can make a difference. And our current board president, the head of the board, Judge Kim Clark, she actually ordered magistrate judges to stop using cash bail in December. Some have stopped, but not all. And so the hope is that we can get something to really make that happen. It's an important thing, I think, to advocate for.
Actually, one of my questions was going to be to ask, like, how can we create change? How can we get involved? And I think the cash bail and going to the bail oversight meetings is...
Jail oversight board.
Jail oversight board.
Yeah, if you look up Allegheny County Jail Oversight Board, you'll see the information on it. But
Jail Oversight Board, the job. Oversight. That's a great acronym. So, Caitlin, this has been really interesting. I feel like we could go on for another couple hours, and we may have to have you back at some point. But
I apologize that I've turned into a dark space. For anyone listening and not seeing, it's completely dark behind me.
She looks like she's in her closet. It's great.
I was going to point that out towards the end here. It's getting progressively more creepy, where you just kind of have the whole background shaking out.
I honestly didn't know that my light was not on when I came in this room because of how sunny it was. And then as the podcast went on, I'm like,
it's too late. It's too late. Too late. And now you're starting to fall asleep. So we have to end the podcast. So I will say though, so I think again, just covering my talking points, I think that that's something where it is a passion. I wish more people were talking about this. And I think I wish it was less politicized, because I do think there are a lot of issues where people on the left and right can come together. And I think at the core of it, I was talking to someone today, we're having an episode next week about Asian hate. And I was talking to someone who is Asian, and we were talking about the different pipes. So you get to some places and it's like using a water park where you have all these different tubes that go down, but you end up in the same water pit. So we may have different ways of getting there, but I think there's really some room to come together. And I think anytime you can get Donald Trump, Lil Wayne, and Kim Kardashian in a room and have them agree on something and pass a bill that, that was a bill that the Democrats tried to get through. I think that's something there's a hunger for on all sides from a lot of people. And I hope that we can look past the whole mentality that the left or the right are both evil and, anyone in jail is never going to be redeemed. And flip side of that, anyone who wants to keep jail systems are terrible and we should abolish them all. I think all of those things are the extremist views, but at the core, there's a lot of things we can come together on. And what I learned this week, I think in general, we need more life skills. And I agree. I think that's important in the school system. As someone who grew up with mentors that helped keep me out of jail and get me out of poverty, I think that's so important. So I think I am leaving here and I want to explore more options for the life skills programs and the expungement thing we talked about. I think that's also important because you got to give people a chance. And I'm all for having an expungement. And we may disagree on, murder is still one. If I'm hiring someone who's a murderer, no matter what the case is, I would like to hear about it. And maybe you disagree, Caitlin, but at the core, at least the base level, the minor crimes, we can agree that there should be an expungement. All that being said, I will say that the thing I appreciate most about the conversation here is when you said your life matters to these people that were in prison, and we got to tell people your life matters. And I think that's so important because whether they committed a terrible crime or not, the hope is, I do personally think there are some people that can't be rehabilitated for whatever reason, but every person should be treated like they can be rehabilitated and their life should matter. And I love Mr. Rogers, and I feel like that was a very Mr. Rogers quote. And I'm glad you're in the pastoral mindset of a Mr. Rogers pastoral care. So that is what I learned. And Gretchen, was there something big that stuck out to you?
You took all the words out of my mouth. I feel like I've learned so much. I could probably talk for a whole other hour. Everything I learned from you. I think because I didn't have a lot of people in my life that have been through it, I just, my eyes are opened a little bit more to what people really experience when they're there and then when they get out. I mean, my imagination just from watching cop dramas, like I love Law and Order, cannot watch SVU, can't do it. But I mean, I think it was the Hollywood version of, but it doesn't seem like it's that far off. I feel like they probably did it justice, but yeah, I keep going back to everybody does really matter. And even if there are a few people who slip through the cracks, I mean, that sounds crazy to say out loud, but giving people the benefit of the doubt and helping people as much as we can and giving them all of the opportunities to make their lives better when they get out is really what and that's where my bias comes in. Cause I want, it's like sunshine and rainbows. I just want everybody to have the most wonderful life they can have, cause it's so short and we only have this short amount of time. So for people to be put away for as long as they are for the silliest and stupidest things, when they shouldn't be, is really where my worry is for a lot of people. So, but I feel like all of your insight has made me feel a little bit more hopeful about maybe the direction that we could be going. And I think that a lot of people are talking about it. I mean, I was even talking, I didn't tell Ray this. I was talking to my neighbor. She and I walk dogs together and she's very conservative. And I was asking her how she felt about it. And we really do have the same thoughts. It's like more people are in jail than need to be. And how can we fix that?
This is where the people have to come together. And I think going back to your mindset there, I think, again, as a conservative person, guilty or innocent until proven guilty, that's what we should be focused on, whether that's in personal lives, whether that's tweets from 30 years ago, whatever it is, innocent until proven guilty. I will say, though, there is something to be said about Dwight Schrute's motto of, I would rather 1,000 men be in prison for crimes they didn't commit than one free man or one man go free for a crime he did commit. So I think if we want to go that Dwight Schrute, I don't know.
That, Dwight.
You were converting me, Caitlin, but I think I'm actually going back to the Dwight Schrute route. Like, let's get 1,000 innocent people in jail just so that one person doesn't go free.
I wish I had the perfect Leslie Knope quote to that with, because she's my hero.
Yep.
I did not know you were a Parks and Rec fan, but at some point, I love that show. And I realized that her feminism from not even 10 years ago would not go over well with feminism today. So I think there'd be an episode to have with The Office or Parks and Rec and talking through it. So maybe we'll bring it back on for that.
Sounds good.
Caitlin, is there anything I mean, you were doing most of the teaching here, but did anything stick out to you from things that we said that made sense, or were you just teaching us?
I think everything made sense. I mean, I think that you guys truly could have pushed so much more. I mean, there are people that really do believe that punishment is necessary. And, I didn't hear that from either of you.
Actually, I was going to say the whole thing of don't do the crime if you can't do the time. And I'm like, that is one of the most horrible things.
Yeah, we didn't even get into that. And I think that goes to what you were saying, Gretchen, that people are understanding this issue better than they did 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And so my encouragement, if I can leave with that, is just continue learning, continue exploring, and try to meet people. I mean, if you have any possibility, you said you love mentoring, Ray, if you can mentor with a program like Foundation of Hope or Amachi Pittsburgh or whatever it is that you care about, if you can read to somebody in jail, go do a dance program with I mean, that is where your eyes will open to just people as they are. And that's how we change, I think.
I love it.
It's wonderful.
We're doing a new wrap up here before we close everything down. I'm just going to talk. So we've been focused mostly on the positives, but I wanted to go over two things I saw in the news this week. And this is away from prison reform, but we want to, as the title says, we want to research the news and hold people accountable. And there was something, I'm bringing up one from each side to be fair and balanced. I tend to look at Twitter now, and Twitter has become, anytime you see someone who has a conservative or Republican interest, when you read the Twitter trending topics, it's usually they've done something racist or they're terrible or they should be canceled. And so I saw Steven Crowder. If you're not familiar with him, he actually had some very interesting things about if you see those memes about change my mind, I believe this, change my mind. And there were some good discussions that he had with people who totally disagreed with him about things like abortion, things like prison reform, all of this, these topics. What I never want us to do, and I want, this is a plea to both you two, the audience, everyone around me. I saw that he was trending this week as a racist. And my assumption is, unfortunately, okay, was it like racist or was it just something that's being put on him? He basically went on, they were talking about the farm bill that was passed to help black farmers. And I'm not even, I'm terrible at accents and I'm not even going to repeat it. It was disgusting what he was saying about black farmers. Absolutely disgusting. And I was like, wow, that actually really is racist. And I hope that this show is meant to hopefully bring people with different opinions together. And we want to have difficult discussions, but I never, if we either Gretchen really does go down the Antifa route, or I go the hardcore far right, I'm just going to just say things to cause trouble. Please call us out on it because it's terrible.
That is terrible.
And on the flip side, the liberal side of the media, this week, I just saw something that was really interesting. We just talked about Andrew Cuomo last week, and Joe Biden was being interviewed by George Stephanopoulos. And I want hard questions for all of our presidents. I wanted them for Donald Trump. I wanted them from Barack Obama. I wanted them from George Bush. I want people to ask difficult questions. And they were asking Biden about Andrew Cuomo. And he said that he should be investigated. He should have due process, but all women should be believed. And I don't know why our news media wouldn't follow up with, what about Tara Reid? And what are your why wasn't she believed? And why was she pushed aside? Because she came out with credible accusations. They were as credible as a lot of the accusations came out. And we never addressed it. So I can't change that, unfortunately. But as viewers, I would challenge you to start looking into some of the things that the media doesn't cover. And if you're a Fox News viewer and you're watching interviews with Donald Trump, I would also encourage you to look up what he actually says behind the scenes. There's no accountability when we tend to have politicians who are on the right go on Fox News and politicians on the left go on CNN, MSNBC, and there's no hard questions. And that's probably the thing I miss the most about journalism. So Steven Crowder, I'm saying it now, you're canceled in my mind. I was so disgusted by that. And Joe Biden, I hope someone asks you hard questions every now and then. I really hope the media does that. So that's my bad media of the week. And we want to end on a good thing. So we talked about the good thing we want to talk about, and we're going to give this one to Gretchen. Gretchen, what's your good news of the week? I had a really
sore arm yesterday because
from working out. Are you humble bragging again?
I don't do that again. I don't do that hardly anymore. No, I got the COVID shot. I got my first shot.
Nice.
I got the Pfizer shot on Friday. I am a teacher, and so I was able to get in. I had to drive an hour and a half to get the shot, but it had a little bit of pain, but I was a little tired that night, and that was about it.
That's good. I did some research on the COVID shot. I wondered why you needed 2 shots. And apparently the first one is a more mild version.
Yes.
And if you react badly to that one, then the second one's probably going to be a little worse. But if you don't react poorly, then you might actually be totally fine because you're already building up antibodies. And by the second one, you should be okay.
Good
so
to go.
Congrats
Fingers
on that.
crossed.
Can we just I feel like West Virginia is the country or the state that gets just dumped on all the time.
Yeah.
Can we just give a shout out to how well West Virginia is doing? Because I know you're from West Virginia.
Yeah. I lived in West Virginia for about 12 years, and all of my friends, they're into what is it? They're 16% now vaccinated. So they are literally killing it. They are taking care of business. And so I was really excited to get it because Pennsylvania is such a huge state. So it is very, very hard to get on a list right now.
Well, congratulations.
It's very hard to get in. Thank you.
All right, so that's the good news, and good news to anyone in West Virginia because you have a ton of vaccine available. Next week, we're going to be talking, I mentioned this already, about Asian hate, and it's going to be a pretty, I don't want to spoil the person we have in the show. I want him to be able to talk about his background, but he has a very interesting background with some very unique perspectives on what's happening now with the Asian hate that's going on. With that being said, please feel free to share this podcast. Like I said, check out researchthenews.com.org, researchthe.news, Facebook research. There's so many ways for you to go share what we're doing here. So we can, eventually, right now I'm seeing there's a few live viewers, which is nice. We have a very core group of people that are following us, and we want other people to hear Caitlin's story and see that there are still Mr. Rogers pastors out there. So I think that's an important thing for society, but feel free to share us, subscribe to us on all of the major podcast sites. This is going up for those watching live on the podcast tomorrow morning. And that's all I have. Do you guys have anything else before we close out? Thank you, Caitlin, so much for
being here.
No, I just want to say I appreciate what you do, because I think part of this work to do good in the world is to have these kind of conversations with people that disagree. So I'm so thankful that you guys are doing that. And I think that's the kind of stuff that can hopefully lead to changes in our criminal justice system as well. Really trying to understand one another.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad after all these years, my true conservative beliefs come out, and you don't hate me. We had a good conversation. So thank you, Caitlin.
That's right.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to catching up with you next week, and we will be inviting Caitlin back on at some point. I don't know whether she'll accept, but we are going to invite her back on. So hopefully we'll talk with her again soon. But thanks again for listening. And that was Research the News.